Hello everyone, welcome to Flooded Temples, episode number 6. Today we're heading to Japan to take a look at some of the Shinto temples and see if we can figure out how some of the semi-flooded lightning-powered shrines may have operated, and how they may have leveraged the power of static electricity to attract that plasma. We're also going to dive into the mythology of Shinto to see if we can find any whispers of the ancient use of static electricity, which was first observed by the Greeks and named Triboelectricity after the Greek word for rub. But first, to better understand the intention and design behind the buildings of ancient Shinto, we need to understand lightning and how it works, so we're going to start there. Lightning keeps many of its secrets hidden from us simply because of its speed and the fact that much of what happens when it flashes is imperceptible to the naked eye. People could be forgiven for thinking there's only one type of lightning, but there are actually a few types, one of which the ancient Shinto architects were specifically after, called ground-to-cloud upwards lightning. The majority of lightning flashes we see in the sky are actually intra-cloud lightning that doesn't reach the ground. But what we're going to concentrate on are the three types of lightning that do strike between the sky and the ground. When a thunderstorm rolls in, what it does is it separates pools of positive and negative charges in and around it, which creates powerful electric fields. Lightning starts between these separated pools of positive and negative charges as a network of electrically conductive channels called leaders. Leaders start to form when they tunnel a path through the poor conducting air between opposite pools of charge. Today we're going to look at bidirectional leaders that make up flashes from the sky to the ground. Usually when this happens, a negatively charged step leader approaches the ground. When the electric field between the step leader and the ground becomes strong enough, a positively charged leader begins to rise, bridging the gap between the two. More than one upward leader will start rising from the ground, but the first to connect with a branch of a negative step leader from the sky will flash with electron flow. This is called the return stroke. Cloud-to-ground lightning strikes are said to be deemed negative or positive depending on the net charge that the lightning bolt shifts to the ground. If a negative leader with a surplus of negatively charged electrons connects with the ground, then the ground gains a negative charge, so it's called a negative lightning strike. Inversely, if a positive leader with a deficit of electrons connects with the ground, an induced surplus of electrons in the ground travels up, shifting a negative charge away from the ground. The ground gains a net positive charge, and so we call it a positive lightning strike. It's even possible to see the difference between a positive and a negative lightning strike when they're going off. After a negative lightning strike return stroke, multiple other return strokes follow, causing the main channel to flicker. With a positive lightning strike, you don't get this flickering. They form higher up in the storm, and because of the greater distance the leaders have to travel through the resisting air, the return stroke of these positive lightning strikes is much hotter, brighter, and longer lasting, with a peak charge almost 10 times larger than the negative lightning, causing abrupt changes in the electric field that will trigger other flashes in a sort of domino effect. This domino effect is what I think the Shinto architects were most interested in. It's called upwards lightning, and it's the third type of ground-to-cloud lightning that travels up into the sky. It occurs when a highly conductive path like a metal wire is run far up into the sky, as in the case of some tall buildings or transmission lines. What you'll notice is the Shinto mark out the beginning and the end of their highly conductive transmission lines from the top of the mountain where it connects with the lightning, down to the temples where they mix the plasma with water and create what's known as plasma-activated water. If you watched my last episode on flooded temples, you'll be familiar with plasma-activated water. Still, if you didn't, not to worry, we'll come back to the subject and discuss more what this ancient medicine did and could have been used for in a bit. First, I want to take a look at Shinto mythology and see if we can find any hints on exactly how the Shinto would build their shrines to attract this third type of upwards lightning, and how on earth they could have safely brought it down from the mountain to be used in their purification rituals. Shinto is Japan's oldest surviving spiritual practice. It's a flexible animistic worldview centered on reverence for kami. Animistic means the belief that all things including animals, plants, rocks, rivers, weather, and even artificial objects possess distinct spiritual essences, and that humans are participants in a community of sentient beings rather than being superior or separate from nature. The Yaoi period from 300 BCE to 300 CE is often cited as the earliest period when core Shinto concepts such as the kami, which translates as deities, spirits, or even divine essence, are said to have originated. The kami are said to be numerous, but in Shinto, Amaterasu, the great sun goddess, is universally recognized as the most important and highest ranking. Another important kami is Raijin, known as the thunder and lightning demon. Even though he's said to be terrifying, he's not evil. He announces the presence of the divine with his thunder, and it's said that Raijin's lightning, when it struck a rice crop, would produce a bountiful yield. This alone is evidence to me that the Shinto understood the connection between lightning and the extra nitrates in plasma-activated water. We'll come back and talk more about the Shinto deities and their possible connection with static electricity when we dissect one of Japan's most famous ethological myths, Amaterasu and the Cave. But first, let's take a look at ancient Shinto symbolism found at temples, to see how it relates to these deities and the temple architecture. You'll notice that while walking around Shinto shrines, also known as jinja, intricately woven hemp and rice straw ropes called shimenawa. Shimenawa, known as sacred ropes, are used to mark the boundaries between the everyday profane world and the sacred world of the kami. They are closely tied to the sun goddess Amaterasu and are said to mark where she and the kami are present. Some very large shimenawa, like the one at Izumo Taisha, historically incorporate thin gold or silver leaf paper strips called kimpaku or jimpaku woven into them, and if you watch shimenawa being made today, it's interesting how easy it is to slip a copper or metal rod into the center of the rope after it's been made. Another thing I found while I was researching shimenawa is that they were also traditionally coated in beeswax, linseed oil, and turpentine, which when mixed act as an excellent insulator from water, heat, and electricity. Basically, the shimenawa, if made in this way, would have rivaled some of our strongest electrical cables made today. Something else that seems ubiquitous at these Shinto jinja is the shide. Made of rice and mulberry paper, shide are usually found hanging from the shimenawa and folded into zigzag patterns resembling lightning bolts. The objects shide are attracted to are said to function as yoshihiro, a physical object into which kami temporarily descends or attaches itself to during rituals. These are the tori, which are also famously known to have shimenawa and shide hanging from them. The tori remind me a little of today's electrical transmission lines. They were built incredibly strong without the need for guy wires like our towers. Still, it seems some thought was put into their ability to conduct electricity while also preventing it from escaping to the ground. Tori are painted with vermilion, which protects and seals the wood while giving it an orange-red color and acting as an electrical thermal insulator. Then the tops are painted with a different paint containing carbon black made from soot collected from burning pine resin. Carbon black paint is very electrically conductive. Tori typically lead from the temple up a mountain or to high ground, where they meet with the previously mentioned Yoshihiro. Let's take a look at a few of the more famous Yoshihiro, starting with Mount Inari's Fushimi and Nari Taisha shrines. Mount Inari is one of the most important spiritual sites in the country. It's famous for thousands of vermilion torii gates forming tunnels up the mountain. When you look at visitors' maps, which makes things easier to see, you can tell there are two other main Yoshihiro on the mountain, the Sanomin Shrine and the Ninomin Shrine, and everything is connected to them via the torii, which leads down the trails between the different shrines. This setup reminds me of today's transmission lines fed from various sources, in that if one source is offline, the other sources can keep the grid running. I think the sources of power at Mount Inari are pretty obvious. Still, what's not so obvious is exactly where they brought that electricity down to, and how they managed to safely ionize the air to create a new plasma arc that would create plasma-activated water full of those purifying kami. To see if we can figure it out, let's look at some of the most common major Shinto structures found at the jinja: the Hoden, the Haiden, and the Kaguriden. The Hoden is the most sacred building. It houses the three sacred objects in Shinto called the Shintai, and it's literally thought as the kami's house. Only high-ranking priests are allowed in, and it's usually elevated and often fenced by the sacred fence or tamagaki. Then there's the Haiden, or worship hall, where people often bow, clap, pray, and offer tamagushi. Finally, another important building at the jinja is the Kaguraden, a sacred dance hall or a place to entertain the kami. Kaguraden commonly have the largest shimenawa in the entire shrine. So what I'm wondering is, which one of these buildings did they direct the lightning to, or was it all of them? To try and figure this out, let's go back to the most important Shinto deity, Amaterasu, and the story of her locking herself in that cave. In the myth, Amaterasu's storm god brother Susanoo caused chaos with his deadly prank on a weaver. Overwhelmed by grief and anger, Amaterasu retreated into the Ama no Iwato, or heavenly rock cave, and sealed it. All the other gods gathered, realizing the world needed the sun. They hung a sacred mirror and jewels on a sakaki tree, and had the goddess Ami no Zumi perform a dance, making the other gods roar with laughter. Amaterasu, hearing the merriment, became curious and peeked out. She saw her own radiant reflection in the mirror and stepped out of the cave. I like to look more closely at the rituals depicted in these stories because I think that's where you'll find descriptions of the technologies they used. We've already talked about the fact that tall conductive buildings and wires are magnets for upwards lightning strikes. But what also helps create those early emission streamers mentioned earlier is if you can put a positive charge on top to connect with the nearly 95% occurrence of negative lightning, and maybe even discourage the other 5% of positive lightning, which is 10 times stronger from connecting with your Jinja. This is where I think the connection between the story of Amaterasu and the subject of static electricity comes into play. I believe the ancient Shinto were using the royal regalia from the Amaterasu myth to generate huge electrical charges that induce an opposite positive charge on the tops of their Hoden buildings and their Shimenawa transmission lines. To understand how this might have worked, let's look at the oldest known type of electricity, static electricity, also known as triboelectricity. Triboelectricity was first recorded by the ancient Greek philosopher Thales around 600 BCE, who noticed amber attracting light objects after rubbing it with fur. Later, scientists like William Gilbert and others built on this and published the first triboelectric series in 1757, ranking materials by their charge tendencies. A simple explanation is that if you rub two materials from the triboelectric series together, you'll generate static electricity. But to get the most bang for your buck, you want to take two things that are really far apart in this series and rub them together, like hair and rubber, as we all know from the classic rub a balloon on your head and stick it to the wall experiment. In 1930, an American physicist named Roger J. van der Graaf invented a relatively simple machine called the van der Graaf generator, which amplifies the small static charges we're familiar with today to millions of volts. Working by using a belt to transfer electric charge into a hollow metal sphere, this charge accumulates until the potential difference becomes so great that it can ionize air and produce a visible spark. This enormous charge is what I think the Shinto were after. Using the same principles that Robert van der Graaf used, the Shinto could have used their sacred royal regalia to build their own van der Graaf generators. You'll notice the magatama are comma-shaped, with a small hole drilled in them. The earliest ones found were as large as 2 inches and were mainly made of talc and serpentine, but magatama also made of quartz, jade, and lead glass started to pop up soon after. Quartz and glass are very well-known triboelectric materials, but talc, serpentine, and jade aren't. Serpentine is generally considered to be positively charged on the triboelectric series. Talc's position on the series is generally towards the negative end. According to Shinto tradition and mythology, the bronze mirror from the imperial regalia is the most precious of the 3 treasures and is considered the actual soul or spirit of the sun goddess Amaterasu. Looking at it, you'll notice it makes a pretty crappy mirror if you're trying to shave or put on some makeup. The ceremonial dagger, the 3rd sacred treasure of the imperial regalia of Japan, is known as the heavenly sword of gathering clouds. This dagger is considered a divine symbolic object rather than a weapon used in practical historical fighting. What I notice about the dagger is its rounded handle that looks like it would make a nice electrical connection in the back of the mirror, and the fact that the tip would act just like the Van der Graaf generator comb, ionizing air through corona discharge. Okay, let's go back to the story of Amaterasu and see if it reveals anything about how the Shinto might have set up their version of this machine. First, we'll set up the 8-foot strings that hold the magatama on top of the sakaki tree. Then let's thread the 500 magatama beads onto the strings, alternating how they face, so when we spin a silk rope through them, they'll rub against both sides. Instead of leaving the silk ropes at the bottom of the sakaki tree, we'll run them up through the beads and back down using something to spin the silk rope through the beads quickly. At the same time, we'll place the pointed edge of the ceremonial dagger close to the spinning silk rope, attach it to the mirror, and wait until the charge has built up significantly. On the topic of how the air between the Shimenawa and the water was ionized to create the purifying kamini, we only need to compare the giant knots hanging from the Shimenawa and the shape of today's high-voltage wire structures. In today's transmission lines, you'll notice that everything that's not meant to leak out strong electric field and create corona losses is built with large rounded edges, and everything that's designed to concentrate the electric field strength, which allows the air to ionize and give you a plasma arc, is very pointy. When you look at the shape of the knots and the Shimenawa, you'll see that everything is carefully rounded until you reach the bottom of the knots, where they become pointy and are trimmed flat like the surface of the water below. This is the location where you're going to get the arcing. It's also interesting to look at some of the oldest Shinto Hoden thought to have existed just after Japan's Jomon era. The roof ridge of these Hoden are adorned with 2 forked finials measuring over 7 meters, as well as 3 cylindrical wooden billets wrapped in copper sheeting. The chiji were made of wood, then wrapped in metal, sometimes gold. There are old tales that the original Hoden at Izumo Taisha were between 48 and 98 meters tall, which is partially corroborated by an excavation in 2000, which found 3 large pillars, each measuring 1.4 meters wide. The original architectural design for these Shinto Hoden are thought to be primarily based on ancient Japanese granaries and storehouses from the Yahoi period. I know, folks. Can you imagine bringing the groceries home and then having to climb up one of these? Let's go now and take a look at another ancient structure in Japan with an obscure purpose that seems to be trying to be taller for no reason at all. The Japanese pagoda isn't as old as the Honden. Its architectural style was introduced to Japan by Buddhist monks from Korea, and before that originated in India as stupa designs. A 7-story pagoda at Shokokuji Temple in Kyoto once reached an estimated height of 109 meters. And on top of the pagoda sits the soren. It's a key feature of Buddhist temples, and is supposed to symbolize the cosmos. It's divided into several segments. First you have the tip, which is pointy like a lightning rod. Then there's the jewel or gem, a spherical or tear-shaped object which is believed to repel evil and fulfill wishes. After that, there's the dragon vehicle, which is believed to symbolize a vehicle used by celestial beings to descend to the earth. The water flame, consisting of 4 decorative sheets of metal set at 90 degrees to each other, symbolizes purification and serves as spiritual protection against fire. The 9 rings are the largest component of the soren. These look suspiciously similar to gradient rings found at the top of lightning arresters at high voltage switch yards. What this shape does is it takes the potential electric field and distributes it horizontally across the vertical axis to prevent the lightning from overheating the tip. Then there's the receiving flower, a circle of upturned lotus petals, usually 8 in number. They represent purity and enlightenment. Finally, we have the base of the dew basin, or robon. The basin symbolizes a vessel for collecting the purifying water. I don't know about you folks, but to me this screams plasma-activated water. The entire pagoda, from its foundation to the tip of the soren, symbolizes the 5 elements in Buddhist cosmology. The main body and roofs of the pagoda represent earth, water, fire, and wind. The last element, known as the void, or spirit, is represented by the soren itself. To me, the mythology of Buddhism and its pagoda looks like it could be related to what we call today as the 4 phases of matter. Some of you might know that the 4 phases of matter are solids, liquids, gases, and plasmas. To get between the 4 phases, you just require heat energy. In the Buddhist version, you have earth, a solid, water, a liquid, and wind, a moving gas. So what is the void that the soren represents? Well, my guess is the plasma. The only thing left over is the fire, which is the energy required to move between the 4 different phases of matter. That's where we're going to leave off today's episode, folks. I hope you enjoyed your visit to Japan. I may come back to look at the shrine Ishi no Hoden, better known as the Floating Rock, but that will be later. I promised a recap of all the benefits of plasma-activated water at the end of this episode, but unfortunately it's run too long. But please go watch episode number 5 if you haven't already, where I've laid it all out, what it is and the different ways we use it today. Thanks again for watching, folks. All the best.